Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jody Hoyo, CEO of the Prevent Cancer Foundation. Welcome to our second webinar of the 2025 Prevent Cancer Dialogue Series, Diversifying Clinical Trial Participation, Pathways from Screenings to Trials. Our third and final 2025 dialogue webinar will take place on October 8th and will discuss molecular residual disease, or MRD, exploring its impact on cancer early detection and personalized care. We hope you can join us for this important conversation. You can register at preventcancer.org/dialogue. Now, we call this series Dialogue for a reason. It's all about exchanging ideas. Over the next 2 hours, we encourage you to brainstorm, listen, learn, and collaborate. We hope you learn from today's conversation and are inspired to bring that information back to your communities and networks. Take the dialogue further by joining the conversation at social media with the hashtag #PreventCancerDialogue. We can be found on all the platforms under the handle @PreventCancer, so tag us and we'll see you there. Before we kick off today's conversations and I make the introductions to our speakers and moderator, I'd like to thank our sponsors. It is their generosity and support that makes this event possible. Thank you to our gold sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb and Exact Sciences, and our silver sponsors, Eisai and Merck. Now, one of our sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb, has a brief message to share with us.
Hello and welcome. My name is Natanya Candelario, Senior Director of Global Health Equity at Bristol Myers Squibb, where I lead our team strategy for inclusive research. Ensuring that the population enrolled in clinical research includes the population affected by the disease is paramount. Not doing so may lead to inaccurate research results, insufficient efficacy and safety data, and may in turn not sufficiently result in effective treatment for all affected by the disease under investigation. We know that there are many obstacles patients face, such as travel and time commitment challenges, systemic mistrust in healthcare systems, and the perception that there may not be personal benefit to participating in clinical research, just to name a few. These challenges are deeply rooted, and we are working tirelessly to do our part. The BMS Health Equity team is relentlessly focused on our philosophy that all people have access and the opportunity to benefit from our medicines and innovation, no matter who they are, where they live, and how much they have. And those innovations include access to and participation in clinical trials. When we embrace the question that every person working for BMS is asked, who are you working for? It is clear to us in clinical research that elevating patient voices in all that we do is imperative to understand their journey and challenges, and to determine a path forward to address them. We must continue to listen early to patients and researchers and remain committed to their respective communities to ultimately deliver on access to life-saving medicines. The formation of collaborative thought partners or multi-sector partnerships where patients remain the focal point for delivering good science is a key step in clinical research and for the patients we serve.
Thank you to the team at Bristol Myers Squibb. Today, we're honored to be joined by Ricky Farley, who will moderate the dialogue. Ricky is a triple-negative breast cancer survivor and thriver, and the co-founder and CEO of Touch, Black Breast Cancer Alliance. For our panelists, we're honored to have with us today Gina Lancy, Assistant Professor of Oncology at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and Assistant Director for Clinical Research and Population Sciences at the Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center. We also have Dr. Kenan O'Neill, Professor of Oncology at the Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center, where he leads the new Department of Clinical Genomics. He is also the founding director of Roswell Park's Center for Precision Oncology and Cancer Prevention. And last but not least, Dr. Luis Carvajal Carmona, Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Diversity and Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Medicine at the University of California at Davis. He also serves as director at the Center for Advancing Cancer and co-director of the Community Engagement Program at the Clinical and Translational Science Center. This is quite an amazing group of people, and we're very grateful they're here. Thank you again for joining us, and happy dialoguing.
I'm honored to be here to engage with you and hear your thoughts and the other presenters on this very important and very complex problem that we've all been trying to address for what feels like a very long time, but I can say for sure we have been making some progress. I am going to get my deck into presentation mode and tell you that I today will share with you just a snapshot of one effort that we've made in our cancer center that has been key to our approach in closing what were very long-standing disparity gaps. And although I'm a girl that lives on a therapeutic end of the continuum, my hope is that I'll be able to offer some advice and some pointers that can be applied well across the continuum, as Jody just mentioned. I don't have any disclosures. My goal for today is to offer you some examples of barriers to diversity and participation as they appear in practice, and how we might go about using data that we have available to us about our trial participation to develop practice-driven interventions that can really move the needle in closing disparity gaps where we practice. And leave you with some thoughts on the influence of the social determinants of health and that role, the role it plays in trial participation. So clinical trial participation, just so that we start in at the same point, it's not a statistic that will be shocking. It is preaching to the choir that I saw coming into the room for today's dialogue. And the estimate is that adult cancer patient participation is between 5 and 12%. It is a broader range than it used to be. It is a range that I like to use because in a recent paper from Joe Unger, there was an estimate that trial participation is really much higher than we've been estimating. You know, we have seen 3 to 5% for a very long time. His paper shows that it may be as high as 12, but then in fact it varies by trial type, which we should pay attention to. The participation among white women has increased, but at the same time, although we've made some progress, what we can see is that there are persistent disparities among racial and ethnic minorities, older adults, the LGBTQIA+ community, as well as geographically based on where folks live. And our goal, as mentioned in the BMS video, is that what we do in our trials is make the effort to include all of the patient populations that are affected by the specific disease that we are focused on addressing in our trials. Barriers to minority participation have shown up now for decades in the literature, and this is certainly not the exhaustive list, but there are ones that show up quite a bit, and it is knowledge and awareness, fear and mistrust, social support, access to trials, research and provider bias, and structural and organizational factors. And what I'd like to say about this list is that we need to expand exactly what we think each of these bullets actually mean. And the one that I will draw your attention to is fear and mistrust. And for a very long time, we've talked about participation or the lack thereof among African-American patients. And typically when you find something in the literature, it is that participation is low. 3-4 lines down, I'd be willing to bet you see Tuskegee, and it is centered around, you know, a historical point. And it is still a very valid point, and it is a reason that we can hear in focus groups and people share with us. But we also know and should confront the issue of fear and mistrust that's actually rooted in how we practice today. In my own institution, that Henrietta Lax's story has come front and center, or that it could actually not be about something that's rooted in anything related to clinical trials, but rather a personal experience, a family experience. How was a family member treated? Did you have a neighbor who seemingly was healthy and only had a cough, but was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer and passed away several months later? And does that leave you with a sense of fear about your own health and your own decision-making, particularly when clinical trials are mentioned? So when I began this work, and I come from a clinical space, I am a long committed oncology nurse, and once a peds oncology nurse, always one, but I made the venture to adult care and in clinical trials. So I've always thought of where a patient is in the path to care. So in front of you, what you have is the way that we began to think about the path to clinical trial participation. And having just mentioned those barriers, what's happening at each point in that pathway? So to your left, the external effort, when we think about what's happening outside, think of it as the street to the center door or to your institution's door. And then once you come through the door, whether or not you end up on a clinical trial, the challenge there, though, is those barriers to trial participation that we're familiar with, we have read a lot about, we have been trying to address, look very different depending on where you are. So back to fear and mistrust, if you haven't made the decision to come through the door, then what fear and mistrust looks like, sounds like, how you express it, what we in fact should do to counter that, what intervention we should put in place is very different from the one that might have to be implemented if you've made the choice that you trust us at Hopkins. You're going to come there, you'd like to have your care there. But if you're fearful or mistrustful of medical research, then you may not end up on a clinical trial. But what I need to do about that, what intervention we implement, needs to be very specific to where you are on the path. So the effort that I'm going to share with you is really focused on once a patient has passed through the center door. Because when I started the work in 2012, what I thought was it is very important that we are accessible in terms of a cancer center, and our trial portfolio is available to everyone, whether you are at the street to center door path point or once you're inside the center. But if we needed to do something right away, and it is an urgent issue, then it seemed more egregious to me that you were already inside the cancer center door and that we have not done everything that we can do to put the latest, greatest, most cutting edge therapy that we have available in front of you for you to be able to make your personal choice. So drilling down a little bit farther, if you're inside the cancer center door and we think about the path to clinical trials, what you're looking at are the 7 steps to a clinical trial. And those blue boxes represent that path. So you've come through the door. Do we have a trial available? Are you eligible? Does the physician think that it is clinically appropriate for you? Did he or she discuss it? Were you interested? Did the patient consent and ultimately enroll? The yellow circles on the second row are all the possible points that a patient could fall off. So that first one, you came through the door, but we actually don't have anything at this point available for you and clinically appropriate for you in the trial portfolio. So you would have a trial not available drop-off point. So there are potential questions to be asked at each point here. And we've done a retrospective to look at who fell off at what point, what is the demographic, what's the disease type. But what I didn't have was much information for these 3 boxes. Who are we talking to about clinical trials? Were they interested? And if they didn't consent, why not? Because we all know that once you sign a consent form, I can pull all sorts of demographic data. I can look at trends in clinical trial participation. But what I was missing are those folks that we talked to about clinical trials that didn't get to the consent point. So those are clinical trial candidates. And in thinking about who they were, these were my questions. When are we deeming someone a candidate? Who are we talking to about clinical trials? And if they decline, why? So practice varied across programs, across research teams in terms of how they define someone as a candidate. So this was the first initiative that I took up to remind you. These are those 3 yellow drop-off points would be answered by candidate data. The first thing we needed to do was define who candidates were. That center-wide definition that was implemented is if you talk to any patient about a therapeutic clinical trial for more than 5 minutes, let's consider them a candidate. And if they don't move on to sign the consent form, tell us why. So we ask that folks do that. And for 2015 to 2019, even though I implemented this earlier, we got the most complete data starting in 2015. And what we found is there were 4,700 clinical trial discussions about therapeutic trials. Those are not unique patients, those are unique discussions. So in a single visit, a patient may be a candidate for 2 or 3 trials, and with their medical team, they come to a decision about one. The other 2 that they decline, or for whatever reason, I'd like to know what the reason for not consenting was. We collected demographic data, and research teams were offered a drop-down menu of reasons why a patient might not enroll: not interested, not eligible, a physician decision, insurance-related issue, no slot on the trial, or other. And they had a free text box to give me a little bit more information about each one of those. Some of the reasons that we heard, and I've grouped those together here for you on the left side. So some of those not interesteds came with a text box field that said that the patient preferred standard of care. They were concerned about the inclusion of a placebo or the study's design. They didn't like the idea of a randomization, or they just weren't interested in research. And those responses were things like, I'd like something that was already approved. So grouping those reasons together, we tried to figure out how we might intervene. And if we think back to fear and mistrust, if we look at some of these reasons, we wondered whether or not those were issues that could be addressed by virtue of an earlier introduction of clinical trials and more clinical trial information, so that that would improve a patient and a family's readiness to receive an offer. The second grouping, financial and logistic constraints, with folks telling us it was too many visits, the visits might be too long, or it was a distance from home that posed a barrier for them to meet the requirement of studies that have frequent visits. And although we can't address all of those, I mean, if part of your reason for telling us it was difficult financially was because you couldn't take time off from work, there isn't an intervention in my toolbox in the Cancer Center that would address that issue for you. We might be able to flex when you can come in to meet visit requirements. But if childcare was an issue, those types of things we couldn't address. So I looked for something that we could. And I opened a transportation study with the leadership in the Cancer Center, and it was to address an issue that we knew existed on our campus, and that is that parking is not free on our campus. And those dollars in terms of parking rack up pretty quickly when anything more than 4 hours is $15 a day in parking. So what that transportation study did was cover the cost of parking. And if you live closer to our campus, particularly in Baltimore City, and you don't have a car, you don't care if I pay for parking. So we opened an arm that included taxi transportation. And believe it or not, the study has actually been open so long that it predates Uber having a business platform. So I used Yellow Cab in Baltimore City to be able to open this, and we just did not convert it to Uber. To date, and that is since 2015, 1,100 patients have enrolled in this study. To date, they complete a survey telling us about their perception of their trial decision being influenced or not by the availability of parking and taxi transportation. The other distinct difference that I will share with you about this study and others that I've been aware of in other cancer centers is that patients are eligible for this transportation study when they are candidates for clinical trials. That means you've not committed to even be screened. So you've not signed the consent. You had a discussion. The medical team believes that there is an available therapeutic trial for you. And once you sign the consent form for the transportation study, we will cover parking or taxi transportation for you to come in to discuss that decision with your nurse, your physician, When you move on to consent, we will continue to cover whatever is required for the screening visits. And should you be deemed eligible and choose to enroll, cover parking or transportation for 1 year. If you progress or come off of that study for any reason, the clock can start over again with a different therapeutic trial. The last grouping here that we saw in reasons, particularly in what people tagged in the drop-down menu as an other reason, was that there were patients who were being referred to hospice before a slot was available, a patient who may have passed away before they were able to actually start treatment but had consented and been screened eligible and were enrolled in the study. And we saw lots of comorbid conditions. So what we thought is that some of the things that we could do was take a closer look before trials are activated at inclusion/exclusion criteria. And we could try to make sure that our relationships with referring physicians, community oncologists was stronger in terms of education, in terms of outreach, so that they were aware of what we had open, so that the relationship was sound enough that there were not concerns about referring patients to us. And then lastly, with that declining performance status, that they were able to reach us and refer patients sooner when patients might be eligible for more in our portfolio. Candidate data can also support you in effort, and it certainly has for us, in terms of overarching monitoring of clinical trial accrual. And that means that we can use that candidate data to look for patterns in trial offers and decline reasons, both as a center-wide effort and for research teams and programs. We use that to monitor, again, the center-wide accrual, program accrual, and then look for ways that we can develop interventions and new plans to beef up what that looks like. And so that we can understand research staff workload. So if you are talking to 15 candidates and enroll 2 and accrual is low, then we know why that might be, but we need to make sure that teams have that information so that they can balance the distribution of new studies as they come in to the research staff. Candidate data can help with outreach and engagement. I am a strong believer that we have too much data, and if we are committed to the catchment area of patients and communities that we serve, we should never show up with a blank page asking them to tell us what to do to improve accrual. There is a starting point we should have, and that can be gathered from the patterns that we can see, knowledge gaps that we can assess based on decline reasons and things that patients are sharing with us about their experiences on trials. And that should inform very specific to communities that we're trying to reach out to, those discussions, so that you can really get to the heart of how to address the barriers that they share with you. So where do we go from here? We need to look at the full path. We need to consider all of this, the discussion about social determinants of health and what the interplay is between those barriers that we see in the literature, and step in closer and try to figure out the balance between where the literature lives, the defining terms of things like the social determinants of health, and where the layers are. Because in fact, the barriers to clinical trial participation begin outside. It begins in the communities that people live in. It lives in what they have available to them so that they can somehow be as ready as they can to receive an offer, even if it's not from us first. And in conclusion, barriers to clinical trial participation and decision-making are influenced by factors both internal and external. We need to be aware of both. Interventions to improve diversity in clinical trial participation have to be informed by the patient population that we serve. So I was happy to hear in the BMS video the question of, who are you working for? Who are we working for? How well do we know them? How invested can we be, must we be, to address clinical trial disparities so that we're not focused on a number in terms of accrual, but in fact, the patient and the communities that sit behind those numbers. And efforts to enhance diversity and participation should begin when studies are designed and should be modified throughout the active enrollment process based on the investment we've made in understanding our patients and our process. And with that, I will thank you for your time and stop sharing so that I can hand off to my colleague, Dr. O'Neill.
All right. So my name is Ken O'Neill. I'm coming to you today from beautiful Buffalo, New York, Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be here with our esteemed panel and all of you in the audience. I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit different than what our first speaker, Dina, talked about, because while her focus was how to help patients who were in the door of the cancer center get to a clinical trial, what I'm going to talk about is our really unique program here at Roswell to bring patients to the cancer center, to our comprehensive cancer center before they've been diagnosed through our really unique cancer risk program that serves as a medical home for patients and families that are at increased risk for cancer because of their genetics or family history. So first, I have no conflicts of interest to declare. And now let's get started. So when someone is diagnosed with cancer, they really have two fundamental questions. Their first question is, will I be okay? And then, of course, their second question is, will my kids be okay? When they're asking really both of these questions, they're talking about genes and genetics and inheritance and predisposition. Um, and, this is a segue into asking about, let's talk about genes, right? So genes. So differences in our genes and their sequences really explain the wonderful diversity and uniqueness that is humanity. Similarities in our gene sequences within families explain traits that are shared within families. And I just want to point out that Hogwarts is real. Okay, so don't dispute me on that. Okay, but sometimes gene sequences can hold the keys to wellness and illness within families. So here, as one example, is Angelina Jolie. And this on the right-hand side of your screen is a really seminal op-ed piece that she wrote in the New York Times back in 2013, in which she described the fact that her mom and many other family members had been diagnosed with breast cancer and other cancers and had passed away because of that, and that she herself had been to a doctor and learned that she was predisposed to breast and ovarian cancer because of a pathogenic variant, an off switch, if you will, in the BRCA1 gene. And so she had chosen to take action by minimizing her risk by having a bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy and bilateral prophylactic mastectomy. This was really an important moment because for many people, it was the first time that they really thought about, how genes and genetics touch all of us when it comes to wellness and illness and cancer risk. Um, and it was a game changer. And if we think about Angelina and this field of cancer risk that she's describing, it leads to a question, which is what is cancer risk? What is clinical cancer genetics, which is the emerging field that aspires to care for patients who are at increased risk? Well, it's exactly that. It's identifying, diagnosing, and then developing and following care plans for individuals who are at high risk for cancer but have not yet been diagnosed with cancer. And so the point is that clinical cancer genetics opens the door. It's the segue from the street to the center for patients and families who have not yet been diagnosed with cancer. And it's our hypothesis that by opening the door of a comprehensive cancer center to patients who are predisposed to cancer, some of them will inevitably be diagnosed with cancer. And by having a relationship before they're diagnosed with cancer between us and our families, we will reduce components of fear and the other things that we heard about in the first talk, we will demystify the cancer center. We will demystify medical procedures by virtue of having this ongoing relationship with our patients and families. And it's our expectation that by virtue of opening that door, patients will have more access to clinical trials, and they'll also be more likely to participate in clinical trials as compared to other patients. So what I'd like to do is really spend some time talking about our unique model, this medical home model that we've developed, how we're scaling it across the healthcare system, and equally importantly, how we're planning to engage our community and make this something that truly is available to everyone in Western New York. It's not going to succeed if it's not useful to everyone. So let's start by talking about just the program and what are genetics and what is genetic testing, right? So genetic testing for heritable cancer risk. So genes are, of course, the instructions for how our bodies work. There is a total of 22,000 genes that are exactly the same in all of our cells. Of those 22,000 genes, only a subset, somewhere between 40 and 100, have been identified as being important for functioning to defend against the development of cancers. So the idea is that if we sequence these genes and we identify a variant in one of those genes that acts as an off switch for that gene, then you can imagine that by turning off a gene that functions to defend against the development of cancer, the risk of cancer, the likelihood that an individual will be diagnosed with cancer increases. So germline genetic testing, germline means looking at the normal DNA that exists in every one of our cells. Germline genetic testing examines the sequence of some subset of these 40 to 100 genes to identify those variants that are these genetic off switches for that live within different individuals. Importantly, because these off switches are passed on to an individual's offspring and are inherited from an individual's parents, it turns out that 50% of any individuals who's been identified as having one of these off switches, 50% of their individuals will also carry the same inherited predisposition and be at increased risk for cancer. So who should be offered genetic testing? Well, there are criteria that have been identified to identify people who are eligible for genetic testing. This includes people who've had multiple primary cancers. It includes people who are diagnosed with common adult onset cancers, but at an unusually young age. And of course, people who have multiple family members with cancer following a single bloodline. Recently, however, it's become clear that these criteria are far too narrow. And in fact, by following criteria, we're missing 50% of all people who have an inherited predisposition to cancer. And so if we go to NCCN guidelines and other professional society recommendations in the past few years, what we see is that anyone diagnosed with breast cancer, ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, endometrial cancer, and colon cancer are now eligible for insurance reimbursable genetic testing as are close members of these families. If we look at one specific population, that is Ashkenazi Jews, what we see is that, in fact, 1 in 40 Ashkenazi Jews has an inherited predisposition to cancer. That's 2.5% of all Ashkenazi Jews, and that's crazy. That's a population health crisis. The other thing that is incredibly important and worth noting in this context is that if we look at criteria for breast cancer, meaning things like breast density, height, weight, age at first period, age at first live birth, and of course, family history, we see that up to 20% of all women on planet Earth meet high-risk criteria for breast cancer. And so what that does, and what we're doing here at Roswell, is that it provides us with an opportunity to make testing available to broad swatches of the population who might otherwise not have access to genetic testing, and therefore welcome them into our comprehensive cancer risk program. Our strategy is to embed genetics into annual mammogram screening and to make it available to all women who have their mammograms through us. So it's important to recognize that germline genetic testing is important not just for identifying people who are at high risk for cancer, but also for defining and guiding therapeutic decision making for patients who are already diagnosed with cancer. So part of the reason that genetics has become embedded in routine cancer care is because providers who are treating patients need this to determine how best to treat their patients, specifically with these 6 cancers that we mentioned earlier. And that's why the guidelines, the recommendations for broadening access to genetic testing is really emerging from these 6 cancers, because it's important not just for their families, but for these patients themselves. So it's important to recognize then that because genetic testing is just testing, there's a lot to do afterwards, right? There's ongoing precision, personalized care for the patients. And then, of course, the information is used by providers to treat patients who have been diagnosed with cancer. And so what that means is that, in fact, clinical cancer genetics, which has historically been genetic testing, has morphed from genetic testing to genomic medicine. And that's what we're doing at Roswell. So, as we've already discussed, for patients who are diagnosed with cancer, precision cancer therapy that definitively improves outcomes is predicated upon understanding an individual's germline genetic status, right? As well as for prognosticating their future risk for other cancers. For their family members, identifying an inherited predisposition is critically important for implementing and providing our patients with ongoing cancer surveillance, or offering them cancer prevention strategies that can mitigate their excess risk. Clinical cancer genetics has morphed from where it was just a few years ago as a sort of sleepy little backwater of cancer care, to really being front and center and having profound medical consequences. It matters for patients diagnosed with cancers and for individuals and family members of those diagnosed with cancers who are not diagnosed with cancer. Importantly, genetics also has the capacity to completely change the trajectory of a family, because it's now possible to use this information to ensure that future generations don't have an increased risk for cancer through technologies such as PGT-M, also known as PGD-IVF, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis linked to IVF. So what is just one example of surveillance that occurs for individuals who are at high risk for cancer because of their genetics? I just chose as one example what we do routinely for our patients with BRCA2, pathogenic variants or off switches in the BRCA2 gene. For women who have a BRCA2 pathogenic variant, we offer ongoing imaging surveillance for early detection or risk-reducing surgery to bilateral mastectomy to prevent the occurrence of breast cancer. For ovarian cancer surveillance, it turns out that there is no effective way to identify ovarian cancer early when it's possible to improve survival. And so our hands are tied. And so we offer our women our female patients risk-reducing surgery, which would be a bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy between the age of 40 and 45. Similarly, endometrial cancer surveillance is possible, but we often see that our patients who, at the time of their bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, choose to have their uterus out as well. For men who are at increased risk for cancer, they are at risk for male breast cancer. In the general population, 1 in 1,000 men are diagnosed with breast cancer over the course of their lives. For men who have a BRCA2 pathogenic variant, it could be as high as 7 in 100. And so what we do is we recommend, in fact, mammograms starting at age 50 and breast self-exam after age 30 or 35. And then men are also at increased risk for prostate cancer. And so we perform digital exams and PSA testing annually starting at age 40. For both men and women with BRCA2 pathogenic variation, we perform ongoing pancreatic cancer surveillance, which is an MRI of their pancreas and MRCP alternating every 6 months with an endoscopic ultrasound. So a direct visualization via endoscopy of the pancreas. And it turns out that that definitively allows for early detection and vastly improved survival for our patients who are at high risk for pancreatic cancer and are then diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. We also do skin checks, so melanoma surveillance for men and women once a year who have BRCA2 pathogenic variants. But it's important to recognize that cancer risk care, this medical home that we're creating, isn't just about checking off the surveillance boxes. It's really about prevention and wellness. And so, what we aspire to offer our patients are additional care, things like exercise and smoking cessation, as well as nutrition consults that help them mitigate some of their other non-genetic risk factors for cancer. But importantly, we also follow things like, and we partner with endocrinology and nutrition as well, for issues such as metabolic health, so and bone health. So when, for example, we throw our women patients, our female patients, into premature menopause by virtue of our prophylactic bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, it's our moral and medical responsibility to do something about it. And so we follow our women with our female patients with ongoing metabolic labs, and we also perform regular DEXA scans to monitor bone health. And we collaborate with our endocrine colleagues and our nutrition colleagues to ensure that our female patients are, as much as possible, metabolically and bone health wise optimized, so that as their bone density, for example, starts to decrease, they are at the maximum that they possibly can be, to minimize possible late consequences of that. So what I hope that you can see is that genetics is not just a sleepy little backwater, but in fact is front and center of cancer care, but that it touches lots of patients, lots of families, lots of individuals who are in the community. And the need is system-wide access to genetic testing, but genetic testing just as a point of entry. And then what it also requires is a medical home for ongoing care for patients who test positive. And that means medical management. And specifically, as I hope you can see from the BRCA2 example, this involves multidisciplinary medical surveillance across multiple specialties. And so patients, families need someone to help them oversee and coordinate care. They need someone to help them bring their family members into the program so that they themselves can get tested and hopefully um, have an improved life as a result. And of course, the critical need is making sure that there is community access to genomic medicine, meaning testing and care. So what we did at Roswell was develop a new department, clinical genomics, to serve as this home, as bringing together counseling through our counseling service, which is for individuals who have not yet had genetic testing, and then our medicine service, which is the medical home for patients and families who are at high risk because of their genetics. And so our mission is that we serve as a cancer wellness medical specialty home for patients and families at high risk for cancer because of their genetics. We aim to link testing through our counseling service with ongoing medical care and to coordinate and oversee our patients' multidisciplinary surveillance needs in partnership with both their regular providers and the many experts who are affiliated with Roswell Park. The model is that we serve as, a centerpiece, as a coordinating center to oversee and ensure that our patients have access to the many different high risk and other clinics that are available through Roswell Park. Okay, so we are their home. We are their source of truth. We are one-stop shopping for our patients and families. We have also enabled scaling of the program by allowing and empowering our partners, our physician partners here at Roswell Park, to order testing and see the results in our EHR, which, believe me, was not simple or straightforward, and then refer patients to clinical genomics after testing has resulted. And so what that means is that we've turned clinical genomics, clinical cancer genetics, from a pre-test counseling service to a post-test management department, just like every other department in the hospital. So we are normalizing the utilization and the understanding of cancer genetics, not just among our patients, but among our providers as well. And so our scope is really prevention and wellness. It's a collaborative program for our patients, their families, our communities. We partner with primary care providers and with Roswell Park experts. We empower our providers to perform point of care testing by ensuring that we're there as a post-testing safety net to care for the patients who test positive, right? We perform longitudinal medical follow-up for all patients with a heritable cancer predisposition. And we serve to coordinate and navigate their ongoing surveillance and other aspects of their cancer risk care. And of course, we use our patients as a point of entry to their family members to then get their family members tested in a process called cascade testing. So I want to give you a sense of the scope of this program because the numbers are really where this program shines, right? So if we think about patients who are seen, new patients, right, who are seen at Roswell Park, we have about 10,000 patients who are newly diagnosed with cancer who are seen and followed here at Roswell annually. Of the 10,000, 5,000 should be offered germline genetic testing based on guidelines and professional society recommendations. Of that 5,000, 20% or 1,000 will have positive testing results. If we think about that 1,000, each one of them is going to have a minimum of 4 first-degree relatives in the Western New York area, parents, siblings, children. All of them will need to be tested. And of those 4,000, right, half of them or 2,000 will be positive. And so if we think about scaling, what this means is that 9,000 patients just from 1 year at Roswell Park, new patients, need a cancer risk evaluation. Of the 9,000, 3,000 are going to need ongoing cancer surveillance and medical management. And then if we return to the concept of population health, and think back to mammograms, right? 15 to 20% of all women in the world require evaluations and surveillance. And so we're making ourselves into a population health program that welcomes community members, family members, and cancer patients. And so our mission is that within 5 years, our goal is that we will turn Roswell Park from a cancer treatment center to a cancer prevention and wellness center that, oh, by the way, offers cutting edge cancer therapy. And to me, that really changes the nature of what a cancer center is and what a cancer center can be. And I can't wait to see what happens. So if we now think about the opportunities of this enormous population health-based program are for clinical trials, well, it opens up opportunities in cancer prevention. It opens up opportunities in cancer interception. And of course, it offers enormous opportunities for cancer treatment. So we can think about, and I think that what's really important is that it turns a cancer center from a place where people come to die, or a place of fear into a place of prevention and wellness and of hope. Because we are just designing our program in a way that is guideline based, it's reimbursable and scalable, right? So we actually have the resources to do what we're proposing. If we think about our patients and our families, by virtue of following them longitudinally, we have a unique high risk prospective family-centered cohort that we hope we can enroll in research and clinical trials. And the point is that we're going on a journey with our patients. This is a voyage of discovery, hoping to give us and most importantly them answers, right? And safety and wellness. So we recruit and consent all patients to our research database and biorepository. We have, by virtue of our ongoing preventive care, we expect that we can facilitate not just natural history, observational, and sample-based studies, but clinical trial recruitment. The two areas of greatest interest are prevention and interception trials. Ones that we're standing up as we speak are exercise to activate immune surveillance and therefore attenuate the development of cancer in high-risk patients. We in Buffalo have a real urban-rural dichotomy. Many of the patients live in farms, in rural areas, and have limited access to healthcare. And so that is one of our major ongoing areas of investigation. How can we keep people who don't have access to the mothership safe? And how can we ensure that we engage all patients in our ongoing care program? We're developing a program to see whether multi-cancer early detection tests, MCEDs, are useful at identifying cancer early and therefore increasing survival. And then, of course, when we think about cancer treatment clinical trials, which is really what I believe the focus of most of everyone who is here today, everyone's work, what I think is critically important is that patients who are diagnosed with cancer, who are part of our program, they're already in the system. They're used to coming to Roswell. Their view of Roswell is defined as one of hope and prevention. And so we believe that this facilitates the transition from prevention to treatment. And indeed, we're actually seeing effects, right? We're seeing that what we're doing really works in less than 1 year. So I got to Roswell a year ago, and so my department is only a year old. In fact, today is our 1 year anniversary. We've already had 8 patients who we've seen who have been diagnosed with cancer and who hopefully are doing well because of early detection, because of the precision cancer risk care that we have offered them and made available to them. And so our hope is that by doing what we're doing, by scaling across all populations and across patients, family members, and the general population, what we'll do is we'll change cancer risk care from what it is now, which is an ad hoc basis, into one that really is precision-based, data-based, genetics and genomics based, that will lead us into a world where patients can be, guided and helped and facilitate their entry into clinical trials that, in partnership with us and with our patients, together we can learn and again just change the trajectory of our families. Our mantra is knowledge is power, and that really is foundational to how we think about things. I'll stop there. Thanks very much. And at the end, I'm happy to take questions. If anyone would like to discuss things offline, this is my email. So thanks very much. And now I will pass the torch to our next presenter.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to present here. I will try to be brief. I think we are a bit slightly late. So I'm Luis Carvajal Carmona. I work at UC Davis in California. I have nothing to disclose. And today I'm going to present a brief outline on how we are approaching this using a community engagement lens. So I'm going to describe how we do things in my lab, in my center, but also we'll present a couple of examples of how this is being implemented in practice. So our group here in California is unique because we have a bench to community approach. Okay, so we have people who work in the wet lab, doing experiments, doing preclinical research, doing molecular and cell biology. We have people looking into data and computational biology, but also we have a strong community-based program that has health educators, genetic counselors, and promoters. So it's a group that is diverse in multiple aspects of diversity, but tries to inform all the basic and translational research done in the wet and dry labs by having a close collaboration and communication with the community, and to basically every experiment that is done, every preclinical study that is done in the lab is informed by a gap in the community. So one of the also unique efforts that we are having here is that clinical trials and clinical research. So something unique that we are doing here in California is that through COVID, we actually learned a lot about the need to have trusted partners in the community. Okay, so here in Davis, I developed a program called Embajadoras, Spanish for ambassadors. And these are trusted community members who are receiving training on health promotion and health equity using a bilingual and bicultural curriculum. They have around 100 hours of training. And once they become certified embajadoras, they are our local ambassadors or contacts in the community. So these are the patients. Each one of these ambassadors, for instance, we are working on a trial that is assessing barriers for genetic testing and counseling among Latinas. And each one of them went to the community and set up a patient support group where they are enrolling and engaging these patients for the study. Next, please. Okay, so a problem that we have in clinical research and clinical trials is that group of scientists and clinicians often work in silos at our institutions and cancer centers, right? So if you think of a cancer center, you may have a program on molecular oncology or preclinical research, and you may have a program on cancer health disparities, but they often do not communicate. So an example of this is, for instance, or national effort where there has been little communication between people working on precision medicine and health disparities is the Cancer Genome Atlas. The Cancer Genome Atlas was an amazing effort by the NCI where I think nearly $500 million was spent in sequencing cancers, and we learned a lot about cancer. But as soon as the project was completed, people started thinking about where is the diversity in the study. Okay, I tell you, in Latinos, colon cancer is the second killer of cancer in Latinos, and not a single patient of Latino ancestry was enrolled among the 500 patients that were sequenced by TCGA. So next slide, please. Okay, so what we're to argue is that we need to have a different approach where precision medicine merges with health disparities and equity, and we are calling this precision health equity, where all these precision medicine efforts, including preclinical research and clinical trials, are informed by the needs of communities, including marginalized communities. Next one, please. And this is an example of our cancer center. We are in Northern California. We are the only cancer center serving the Central Valley and the California Sierra. And here I'm showing you on the maps of the catchment area. We have 19 counties. Okay. And on the left, I'm showing you the fraction of people who are non-white. So here, the darker the map, the less white is the region. So for instance, the lower county, Merced, 71% of people in Merced are people of color. On the right, I'm showing the average age of these people. Okay, so in Merced, around like 40% of people are, like the average age in Merced is around 30 years. Okay, so here in our catchment area, we have one part of the catchment area that is very diverse and is very young, one part of the catchment area that is less diverse and is older. So we're using this information to say what type of effort should we focus to advance, cancer control here. So one of the things that we believe is important in our area is that for these people of color who tend to be young, we should be focusing our efforts on preventing cancer, right? For these people who are less diverse but who are old, we need to be working on facilitating their access to interventional trials, to clinical trials, the standard clinical trials. Next slide, please. Okay, and I am going to focus the next slide primarily on Latinos because Latinos are the largest and fastest growing population here in California. California is a majority state where 40% of the people are Latino. They are the largest group. And as you can see, by the 2060, they are going to be practically the majority of the people in the state. And they have been traditionally populations that have been underserved by clinical research and basically cancer science. Next slide, please. And we launched this initiative called Lucha, which stands for struggle in Spanish, and is Latinos United for Cancer Health Advancement. And this initiative is an initiative that we were very intentional on making a program that will investigate, address, and understand the main gaps in terms of cancer control in this growing and important minority population in California and in Carmen area. So the intention was always to have Lucha as a national model for community-based, bilingual, and bicultural research and implementation of more Latino communities. Next, please. This is the data from the American Cancer Society on the most common cancers in Latinos for men and women in terms of number of newly diagnosed cancers and number of people who die of cancer. And as you can see, Latinos, they tend to have all the cancers that are common in other populations like colon, like breast, like lung. And next slide, please. Well, here I'm showing you the rank in blue of the same cancers in the white population of the US. And there are a few cancers that are highlighted in red that are very relatively rare among non-Latinos, but very common Latinos. In this case, is liver, stomach, and uterine cancer. So in Lucha and here in our group, we are putting a stronger effort in these cancer types because in general they are also understudied by in the community. Next, please. Okay, so let's go with the next one with an example of colon cancer. So as you can see, colon cancer is an important cause of cancer incidence and mortality in Latinos. It's the second cause of mortality in men and the third cause of mortality among Latina women. Next, please. And this is an important table because colon cancer is one of the preventable cancers. Okay, there are clear guidelines for prevention. There are effective ways to prevent cancer, including mammography, cervical cancer screening and colon cancer screening. And the second column, this table is showing you the current use of this screening. So we are underusing colon cancer screening in all populations. But if this table is showing you, if I increase by 10% the screening rate for these three cancers, I will save 1,500 lives. If I focus on breast cancer, we will say 24,000 lives if we improve colon cancer screening. So this is clearly an area where cancer prevention should be focusing a lot of our efforts, and this is something that we are doing here. Next, please. So something that we did initially in Lucha was to have a survey of health needs. So this was before the pandemic. We have these bilingual and bicultural cancer health educators, and we went to the community. We went to meet them where they were, and we actually have a survey on needs. And something that was very striking is that the colon cancer screening rates were very low, particularly among Latinas and particularly among foreign-born Latinas, among immigrants. So the rates among Latinas in this survey was around 35%, when the recommendation is to be around 80%. So clearly, we saw a gap here that we wanted to address, okay? Because colon cancer is highly preventable and the screening is very effective. So next, please. Something that we did was something relatively simple, which was to basically use this intervention where we were basically bringing this inflatable colon to the community, to all these marginalized and rural communities in California. We have bilingual and bicultural educators, and we have promotoras trained on this. And we actually walk people through the colon, and we provide them with education. And also we are linking with local clinics to offer feed screening tests, feed tests for the ones who are not up to date with the screening. But these one are examples on the right and showing the how colon cancer knowledge increased, and it increased significantly with a very simple intervention. And now with this partnership with the communities, we are actually having increasing screening rates for this community that will otherwise wouldn't be approached by a cancer center like ours. Next, please. Okay, let's move forward to gastric cancer. Next. So gastric cancer or stomach cancer is the top cancer health disparity among Latinos, and is another important focus of our research here. If you see in terms of incidence, for instance, Latinas are 2.27-fold more likely to be diagnosed with a stomach cancer compared to white women. And if they are diagnosed with a stomach cancer, they are 153% more likely to die. So it's the top cancer disparity in Latinos. And as I said, it's an important focus of our research. Next slide, please. And we have been doing, as Dr. Onay was saying, we also do cancer genetics here. And we actually reported a few years ago a finding where we found a significant number of patients with gastric cancer had mutations, genetic mutations in these known cancer susceptibility genes. And that was actually a study that we reported and has been replicated by multiple other studies. And I will say it's one of those other cancer where we should start thinking about universal screening, like the ideas proposed by Dr. O'Neill. Next slide, please. And this is an example that we just published in eBiomedicine. We sequenced around 750 patients with either early onset gastric cancer or familial cancer, and we found that around 1 in 11 of them have a germinal mutation. So they could potentially benefit from prevention, right? And this, gastric cancer has been traditionally considered an infection-related cancer, not a germline-driven cancer. But if this is something that we are highlighting, that a genetic predisposition is important. And it could be potentially quite impactful because of the large number of patients that are diagnosed with this cancer. There are 1 million people every year in the planet that are diagnosed with stomach cancer. So if we do a simple calculation, around 80,000 people of those 1 million people are having stomach cancer because they have a genetic predisposition. Actually, we are starting a clinical trial on this. Next slide, please. Something that we are doing here is we're doing a lot of minority-focused preclinical research. So we are making patient-derived xenograft and patient-derived organoids of mostly, not only, but mostly minority patients, because they are the ones being seen a lot by our consortium here in California. And this example, I have this slide because we are switching the strategy. We are targeting, identifying that these minority patients are enriched by particular, by a high frequency of some druggable or targetable mutations. So we are doing preclinical research using models from these communities. And ideally, once we move forward to establish clinical trials, they're going to be targeting cancer defects that are enriched among these minority populations. So this will be kind of a strategy to increase our minority-focused clinical trials here in California. Next slide, please. So something else that we are doing is that because Lucha has been quite a successful study to engage Latinos in research, cancer research, we are expanding this to other communities. So we have 2 initiatives. One is working with the American Indian, Alaska Native communities from California. We are doing some work with them on gastric cancer too. And with the Hmong populations, it's a small Asian populations where we have a large population of Hmong here in the Central Valley. We are working with them on addressing issues with colon cancer because it's the top cause of cancer mortality. So we basically use primary and secondary data to identify the main cancer needs, and then we have a community-focused approach to start addressing those needs with respect to the community. Next one. This is my last slide. Latinos have been historically underrepresented on clinical trials. We are using data-driven trials across the cancer spectrum. We are particularly focusing on cancer prevention. Community participation requires extensive trust building. Okay, clinical trials are not going to happen. Not going to happen. I cannot just show up and say, hey, I have this trial. Why don't you enroll? We have been spending years on this. Okay, years on being known by the community, being seen. We have been looking at a lot of barriers for the participation, as Dr. Lancy was presenting, and we are trying to come up with solutions. Something else that I would like to think is that the cancer center, this center funded by federal dollars, should reimagine how they become a true community matrix. Okay, so I think we should stop thinking the patient needs to go to the center for the trial. Why don't we have satellite places where it's easier for the patients to go, right? So they don't have issues with transportation, childcare, etc. So barriers that are unique to our population in California are trust, immigration. We have a lot of issues with immigration among our communities. Issues by homemakers and solo men. So a lot of Latinas, those Latinas that were not very up to the colon cancer screening because they are homemakers. They may be undocumented, they may be uninsured, they don't have a right, they don't have anyone to take care of the children. When are they going to go to have a health checkup? It's difficult. And solo men, also we have a lot of immigrants from Central America who are farm workers, and they also have a lot of issues with health equity. Co-pays, language, a lot of our cancer center in California, it's unbelievable, but a lot of the trials are not translated to Spanish, the second most common language spoken in the region. I think that's the last slide. I thank you for being patient and listening to us. I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Wow, this has been such a rich discussion. I'm so excited to talk to all of you guys. I'm Ricky Fairley, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Touch, the Black Breast Cancer Alliance. I'm a 13-year survivor, very blessed survivor of triple-negative breast cancer foundation, triple-negative breast cancer. And I I actually am only alive because I took experimental drugs. My cancer was, diagnosed as stage 3. I did all the standard of care, mastectomy, all the things. And then it came back exactly a year later. And my doctor said, I have nothing for you. And I said, well, we've got to find something. I have to put my kids through school, so work it out. And I was able to do some experimental drugs at this time. And at that time, and I didn't die. She'd given me 2 years to live, and it's been 13 years. So I'm very blessed to do this work. This is my God job. And I'm so happy to talk to all of you guys. The stuff that you're doing is amazing, and we have to advance science for everyone. And so I think all of these efforts are so critical. So I think we're going to start with the survey, right? We are going to try to do a survey, and I think you guys here's a poll in front of you. If you guys would answer the poll, I would be very grateful. So take a look, and then we will take a look at our results. So the question is, has your institution taken action to address access to clinical trials? A simple yes or no question. I think it's probably more complicated than a yes or no answer, and we'll get into that discussion. But I think you will see that, we'll be interested to see the results. So let's give it a minute to get these results in, and we'll take a look at that. I think, though, what we've seen here from our amazing speakers is that everybody is sort of in the same boat of looking to get access to clinical trials to help patients find precision medicine. But I don't know that it's all across the board. And I think your efforts are so amazing and noble. But, I work in a space with Black women, and we're not seeing those, those kinds of efforts and really, we did a research study about 4 years ago now to understand why Black women weren't participating in breast cancer clinical trials. And the number one reason was doctors don't invite us. And, doctors don't invite us, so whether it's illicit bias or racism or what other things are, but doctors aren't inviting us. So the fact that you guys are inviting, and Dr. Ken, I'm so amazed at, what you guys are doing in your center about, inviting patients and making them part of the conversation. The other reason, and equally as important, I think you all are also addressing, and that is exactly what is a clinical trial. And I think if any of us went out and called a relative today, your Aunt Edith, your Uncle George, and said, do you know how a clinical trial works? They wouldn't be able to answer. They don't know. But how would you know? How would anyone know, right? I didn't know what it was. And, but how would you, until I was sick, but how would you know? And so I think we expect people to understand this kind of science, and then we expect them to know about it and learn about it when their hair's on fire. They're in a crisis, and they're sick, they're on fire. And so how do we, I guess we're ready to close the poll. I think we're ready to close the poll, Adrian. So we can launch the results in a second. But so a lot of the work that we're doing to educate people, it's at a really, really hard time. So I think are the poll results going to show up on the screen? I hope you guys. But it looks like 49% are saying yes, 20% are saying no, and 31% are saying unsure. So I'm not sure if they're going to pull up a slide to that effect, but 49 yes, that's great, right? That's still under half. 20% are saying no. That's still a huge number, right? A huge number that their institutions are not taking action. And 31% are unsure. So what is that saying? That's saying probably, there's some efforts going on. Maybe they're not consistent. They're not clear. Maybe they're trying. Maybe they're not doing the right thing. So I think, I'm a kind of a marketing person by trade before I did breast cancer advocacy. And to me, it's all about what are the results? What kind of impact are we making? What are we doing, right? So I have so many questions for you guys. I'm going to start with you, Dina. Do you think that I think we find that education helps build trust when we do it. So I think you're working really hard, and I think all of us are. And how do you build trust? Is trust a factor with trials? You know what I mean? Is it the trust in the medical system? Like, what role does that play, Dina, when you're in your conversations?
It plays a huge role in clinical trial decision-making, but the building of trustworthiness starts well before that. So I think that when thinking of the speakers that we've just heard, we're all from academic cancer centers. There are overarching rules, if you will, expectations about what we do. And it is to cover that path from outside to inside. Well, trustworthiness begins outside. If I'd like to see you inside on a clinical trial after you have a diagnosis, there's work I have to do inside for you, but I need to partner with the folks like Luis and Kenan that are outside. What are you saying about clinical trials? What are you saying about what we do inside these four walls? And I think that the silos that Luis mentioned aren't just within the cancer center, they are actually within medicine. So I think the building of trustworthiness, if there was one takeaway of all the folks that are on the call, we need to talk about clinical trials when there's no skin in the game. And you just raised that point, Ricky. But it actually means that I've found myself at community events when I've already told you my focus has always been on the therapeutic end of trials. Well, my cancer center, sorry, knew it was important that I be outside in the community. But what I tried to explain is, do you know that the odds of somebody walking up to this table at this community or church event who happens to be relatively newly diagnosed, who's trying to make a decision about treatment, who I can talk to about a clinical trial that's going to impact numbers inside? Not likely. What is more likely is that I can have a conversation with you who Ricky has just told me she has hypertension for 20 years and she's annoyed because she gets up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Well, you know what, Ricky? I'm going to tell you, you should talk to your primary care provider about the latest thing happening for control of hypertension. And I can give you something that says, this is how clinical research works. It's not a cancer clinical trial, but we have that. The foundation is all the same. What can you expect? What could you ask your physician? What should you think about before you say yes? That's actually the only point at which it's all in common. Because once you get a diagnosis, every single thing about your decision making is different depending on where you are in terms of your disease and what type of trial I'm offering you. So trustworthiness is outside. We need to be more transparent. We need to spend more time and be more willing to invest when it's not tethered to an accrual number.
Yeah, that's so critical, you know. And Dana, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about this. I just came back from ASCO, you know, and I started thinking, what doctors do we trust? Because by the time you get to the oncologist, you're on fire and you're in a crisis, as you just said. And so if you think about who are the doctors that you go to regularly, your dentist, maybe your gynae as a woman, your GP. Men don't go to doctors, so I'm talking about women here primarily, right? But I mean, if you think about, when my gynae found my cancer, and I had known her for 10 years, so I trusted her. So if I had been in her office and learned about a clinical trial, that would have been way before I had cancer, would have been a whole different conversation. I mean, I wish we taught this stuff in high school, right? About genetics.
And you know what? You would, if we offered you a clinical trial, whoever that trusted medical provider is, your internist, your your
pediatrician,
you're going to go back to them and talk about this decision making.
You are.
So it's important that the three of us have a relationship with the practitioners that are referring or potentially referring. How easy do we make it even for them to get behind the curtain and see how we choose the trials we open? Do you have to worry about whether or not I'm going to ever send your patient back, or if you refer them in, they're gone for good and your private practice is now, down 1 patient, 10 patients?
Right.
So it's a balance in that relationship, but none of them are quick fixes. So I think that's the thing that we need to talk about more as we talk about clinical trial participation, whether it's in terms of diversity or in volume. It's a long game of investment and commitment that ends up
where the vision needs to be. Right. And I'll bring up some stuff that we've been doing later, but I want to see Dr. Ken or Dr. Luis, do you want to weigh in on this at all, or are you kind of in agreement with us on the whole trust thing?
I mean, we have done that, and I think, I'm a PhD and I'm an MD, but I think it's important to meet with people where they are. It's important to pray with them, to eat with them, to share with them, to be seen. If you speak the language, to speak the language and to understand, right? This is something that is, as Dr. Lancy said, it's not a quick fix. You know, this is something that you need to really invest the time and effort, be seen in the community, right? And use your level as a education center to improve things. I mean, I remember when I started Lucha, I actually got together with our cancer center and provost and like, we need to do something about it, right? So as a professor, I leveled my position to start Lucha. But trust is very important. Being able to explain things in simple ways that people understand. It's important. So in Lucha, we have this
In
emphasis of
words
being
they can
bilingual.
spell or in their language, right? Right?
Yeah, bilingual and bicultural, right? And don't be down, but like you make it simple because, for example, clinical trials here with Latinos, they will say, I don't want to be, a ratón de laboratorio, like I don't want to be treated like a mouse, right?
A
So that's
guinea pig, a
the
guinea pig, a guinea pig,
guinea
right?
pig, right? And if we explain that with detail, people will get it and people want to participate. Black and brown people,
Yeah,
rural
they do.
people, people who are not that wealthy, they want to be part of this once you
Yeah,
explain it.
yeah, yep. I actually we launched a campaign 3 years ago now called When We Trial. If you go to whenwetrial.org, and I'll put it in the chat, but it's a website basically educating about trials and saying, no, there is no sugar pill. Yeah, you know that Advil you took last week? It was in a clinical trial. You know that heart medicine I gave my dog Harper? It was in a clinical trial. When you break
Mhm,
science and words people can spell from the voice of a survivor, a voice of trust, I'm not a doctor. I have somebody with lived experience. Then they believe me, sign me up. I don't want to die. I don't want to have this disease. And so we know it works. And we'll keep going. I'll show a quick video that we used to launch our campaign, but we've now signed up 26,186 Black women into our clinical trials portal because
wow,
of this campaign. But I like to
amen.
say we go into the community. I like to say we go where Black women live, work, play, pray, and slay. And we don't go
Mhm,
downstairs. We go into the community where they're not thinking about health and catch them off guard at church, at a community event, at a soccer field. You know what I mean? And so we have to talk to them and meet them where they are and bring up the science in a different way. So, Dr. Ken, I think you're chomping at the bit, sweetie. Talk.
I mean, everything that all of you are saying really resonates, and it's so foundationally true. Two thoughts from the stuff that we're doing. First, I think follow through is really important,
Yeah,
and that's what builds trust. If you say you're going to do X, you actually do it, right? And that's where our cancer risk program is so important, right? People come in, we save lives, right? We say this is what we're going to do. And in fact, we do it, right? That buys an enormous amount of trust and goodwill, and that brings family members into the program. I think that opening the door is the necessary first step, right? I also think that, what all of you have been discussing about meeting people where they are is also incredibly important. Something that we do here at Roswell is that we have a mammogram bus that goes
right.
into the community and offers to community members in poor parts of Buffalo the opportunity to just have health screening. And we were discussing during my presentation the risk scores, identifying high-risk women. We embed that in our Bus. And so at the time of mammography in the community, we offer people genetic testing right then and there. And that invites them to come to us, right? To learn and to be cared for. And, I think that's super important. And just like you were saying, Dina, in terms of going out to the community, one of the things that I love to do is to just introduce the program to people in the community and ask for help, right? this is here. We would love to help people. How can we do it best, right? What is your advice for us? And I think that asking for help, really approaching our potential patients, our families, with humility and with honesty is our secret sauce. It's what's really working for us, and it's 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 opening the door early, and just offering to help, I think, is really important, right? And the way that we try to do it here is not by mentioning clinical trials at all, right? This is about wellness and prevention, right? That's where we're coming from. And then after we've established a relationship and we've demonstrated that we're trustworthy, if it becomes necessary, then we can talk about options, right? But it's really just about caring for people and caring for families. That is, for us, the entry point.
It's about love. It's about love. I wear hearts a lot. I don't have them on today, but it's
Yeah.
about love. We're in the love business. It's
Respect.
love and respect and just
Right.
make
Uh-huh.
feel
Yeah.
better. Everybody wants to get better. So Dr. Ken, you talked earlier a lot about genetic testing and stuff. And so the data that we have, basically 37% of Black women do not only get genetic testing versus 85.7% for white women. We are not getting genetic testing. And then if you look at genomic testing, only 8% of genomic testing participants are BIPOC. And so we know our community is not getting asked to be tested as not only not being asked for trials, not even for genetic testing. So I think what you're doing is amazing, but we're not seeing it across the board.
Well, remember, we're just a year old, and part of my hope by telling about what we're doing, about our making testing just an SOP, right? It's not
Yeah,
something that anybody thinks about. It's
right.
part of what we do for every patient, right?
Yeah,
That becomes a great equalizer, and
yeah.
imitation is surely the greatest form of flattery. So if our example helps other centers reimagine how they do things, then that's phenomenal. That's a win for everybody. But you're totally right. It just shouldn't be something that is part of picking and choosing. This is for everybody. So let's just
It should be protocol. It should be protocol for everybody,
that's what we did. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
I know one of the other things that we use a lot is navigators. We have
Mhm.
a 24/7 navigator team, and they're all Black women. They're all breast cancer survivors, and they're all navigators, either nurses or social workers. And they are 24/7. So when the cancer center closes at 5 o'clock, they can call us. They can call us anytime, but they are the ones that are saying, okay, go to your doctor and ask for genetic testing, ask for a trial, and kind of being that coach on the side to help them get through. I don't know if you guys have used navigation at all in your practices to help with this stuff.
We actually have family outreach navigators that, our patients sign up through a portal. They get called by a navigator manager who matches them
That's
with a navigator who helps them figure out how to talk to their family about these things, because genetic testing is complicated, and like high blood pressure or high cholesterol, it's a future risk, right? So how do you actually impart to someone, via intermediaries, right? Someone that's not us, the sense of urgency and the sense of importance. And that's where our family outreach navigators are incredibly helpful.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm third generation breast cancer. My mom had it, her aunt had it. So my daughter at 39 got a prophylactic mastectomy. She has three babies. I have three precious granddaughters. And so I'm done. You know what I mean? Because and I have no genetic mutations. So what do you call that when it's like the uninformative genetic test or something, or like, unknown variants, right? So there probably is a gene out there that could be attributing to my triple negative breast cancer that we haven't identified yet, like the Duffy gene or something.
And
Right?
and that's part of what we're doing as well. One of the things that I personally love to do is discover new tumor predisposition uh,
Yeah,
conditions, because our goal is to get answers to our families, knowledge,
right.
power, right?
Right,
And
right.
so we have an entire program to families like yours that have something that really seems to be inherent,
Yeah.
but no answers, right?
No
So
answers, no answers. And our issue in our community, I think similar with the Latina community, Dr. Luis is talking about it, getting families to talk about her story. We call it knowing your her story, knowing your history, who has what, whether it's high blood pressure, heart disease, whatever, who died of what, because we don't really talk about it in our community until somebody's sick in hospice or Uncle Pookie gets his leg amputated, right? So Dina, do you want to comment on that? Or you're shaking your head. Anybody talk. Don't wait for me to call you guys.
So I have a thought, and then there are two questions I want to make sure we get to in the chat, and one in particular from Tara that I would like to speak to. The comments about navigation. I think navigators do play important roles. And I think that in the context of this conversation, when we hear and when I'm invited to have discussions about how we increase diversity in clinical trials, I think that we tend to think of it in even that in a very siloed way.
Yeah.
That when Ricky, to your comment that Black women that are connected to your organization and in your personal life haven't been extended an offer to participate in the clinical trial. So I think that points out that there is both patient and community education that needs to happen and provider education and community.
Yeah.
And the umbrella over that is letting people understand how your institution works. Are we orienting people to the idea that I think that there should be a discussion about clinical trials in every single first visit with a physician. It doesn't mean that we have something for you.
Right.
But
But just educate about it. Yes.
Absolutely. It starts the education that hopefully we're building on because it started outside, but it also starts to normalize this discussion. Because what happens is if it doesn't happen in that first visit, even though your hair is on fire, Ricky, if I don't mention it, and we do first line therapy that might be standard of care, and then we get to a point that now it's a trial open in our center, and I'd like to offer it to you. If I've not laid the groundwork that a clinical trial is a potential treatment option that might be in front of us, the patient and the physician and the medical team at some point, then you might come with the preconceived notion that, oh, good Lord, he's mentioning a clinical trial to me. I need to leave here, get my affairs in order. It's over.
Yeah.
And God forbid he offers me a phase 1 study. Well, now I've not done the education that all phase 1 isn't first in human.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So we need to normalize those discussions and figure out what type of navigation and what's the skill set of that navigator at what point on the cancer continuum.
Yeah, I want to share a quick video that we use in our work, and I'm not sure if I can actually share the sound, so maybe I shouldn't share it. I didn't share it ahead of time. Let's try it, but I'll put the link in the chat anyway. But this is an example of a woman that we work with who did a phase 1 study. So tell me if you guys can't hear it, okay?
I am a stage 4 triple negative breast cancer survivor. I was one of the first people in the nation to join the trial that I did. To be able to participate in that was huge. It saved my life. The drug hasn't reached the market yet. But without participating, we don't know the true efficacy. We have to participate. Research is moving forward. We don't want to be left out.
So we use Karen's story because she did participate in a phase 1 trial for a drug that wasn't even for breast cancer. The drug was never approved, but she's alive. And so just an example of we share her story, but this is what we can do, I think in our campaign is working, but we have to keep telling the story over and over and over again, you guys. But I have so many more questions and we're running out of time.
Oh, you have 2 questions in the chat.
Yeah, okay, go for it. You want to answer? Go for it.
I'll read the first one and then you guys can chime in and I'll do
That'd be
the.
great. That'd be
So-
great. I'll read it from Claudette.
Okay,
Do you have suggestions for ways health systems and providers can do more to provide information about clinical trials for our community members? So you guys are doing all this work. I think, we've shared a lot of ways that you're doing it. What I'm hearing from you, Dr. Louise, and you, I don't want to speak for you guys, is sort of bench to community approach. And you're really doing the same thing, Dr. Ken, in terms of reaching out to the community and educating people about their genetics and what precision medicine is all about. But is there anything specific we can do to answer this question?
I
And do you
will, I will, s-
go ahead.
yeah, I would say that it's important to have a community-facing component of your center, right? Like just have someone who leaves the ivory tower of the cancer center and goes out there, is seen, is trusted, speak the language, not only Spanish or English, speaks the language how people in the African American community
Critical.
like to think,
Critical.
right? So, or if you are, Arab American or Jewish American, or if you live in a rural population, if you live in a neighborhood is challenging to have that. And that is the concept of embajadoras. These people live in the community. So they know how it's to live in that particular neighborhood. They go to the same church, they go to the same places where everyone goes, right? So this concept of navigator, we call them embajadoras, right? There are multiple things, promotoras, community health workers. They are the one who can help us translate this complex language. It's complex to say, oh, mutation X or we or this target, right? Or drug X, and I don't want to be part of that, right? Just make it simple,
Yeah.
and
And
communicate with.
Keep it
Keep
simple.
it simple.
People can spell. And you know what I call it, Dr. Louise? I call it cultural humility.
Mm-hmm.
Meeting people where they are with a voice of love,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Dr. Lancy.
That I would add is that it's important to tell them what happened. So, when Luis just said, that you send out into the community to have these discussions, the people that it makes sense to send them out. I mean, I have a great deal of respect and regard for some brilliant people I've worked with who are from bench scientists to clinician investigators. I don't necessarily want them to go with me to the church event because he or she will look like she's uncomfortable. And I don't need that. And because people sense it, it's putting people in the right place. I might invite that same person to come to a barbershop event with me, sit in a chair and tell us what happened, with the clinic that you opened and the genetic testing that you're doing and why it's important. And maybe, hey, Dr. Kennan, we'll get you a shape up while you're in the chair. But I think that you get the right person to deliver the message, to Luisa's point, but you also go back and just tell them, we are tremendously grateful for the fact that you, family members, community members, neighbors that you don't know well, are all part of the reason that we're able to move science forward, so that we really are here. If and when you get a diagnosis, the science that's available to us is, on the shoulders of people just like you who made a decision that was right for them at the right time to join a clinical trial, because it removes the notion that we are going into the community to recruit people. We are going into the community to educate people so that by the time you get an offer, I really don't care if you say yes or no. What I care about is that you had everything you needed.
You had the opportunity.
You had the opportunity and you had everything I needed to give you as a clinician and educator for you to make the right decision for you. Let me worry about whether or not I keep a job if the disparity in the cancer center stays. It's about you being able to make the right decision for you.
But you know what? I think that's also the role of an advocate. I mean, that's what we do as advocates and advocacy organizations. And I think we have to, be more connected to the hospitals and to the doctors, because the call I get at 7 a.m. today, 3 of them between 7 and 8, was I got my chart. My chart said I have a malignancy. What does that mean? And this 22-year-old that got a malignancy in my chart this morning isn't going to see her doctor for 3 more weeks. Right? I can't get an appointment. You guys know the system. And so But you know what? The bad news is that she got the My Chart by herself in her house, whatever, alone. The good news is I can talk to her and I can talk her off the ledge, and my navigator can talk to her and explain what a trial is, explain what genetic testing is, explain what precision medicine is. So by the time she gets to the doctor, God forbid that it doesn't take that long, she's informed and educated. And that's what we kind of try to do. But anyone want to answer that question before we go to the next one?
Yeah, I just, first of all, what you just described, Ricky, is appalling, you know? Um,
Happens every day, doc. Every day, sweetie. Every day, doc.
I know. It's the same thing with genetic testing results, but that's why inherent, follow through, right? The results, when I get them, we share them, right? Even if it's not an optimal face-to-face encounter, even if it's over we arrange the face-to-face encounter at the time of sharing. And it's not just the genetic testing results, it's the surveillance results, right?
Yeah, yeah, everything. The
It's
scan results, all the things.
that's right. It's our job and our moral duty to, you know, be there, right? I mean, that's what we signed up for as providers, right? And that's what our patients and families expect of us. And if we're not doing it, we're failing. And that's not okay. Um, I'm a little bit on a soapbox here, and
That's
I've
okay. It's a good soapbox. We love it.
and so it's follow through. Again, it's back to follow through. That's how you establish trust, right? And I just wanted to sort of pick up on what Dina was saying earlier in terms, and Luis, in terms of going out into the community and meeting people where they are. I love doing that. And but the messaging is different in different contexts, right? So in Black and Latino communities where there aren't, 1 in 40 people who are at high risk for cancer, it really is about education. What is genetics? Demystifying what this all means, right? And again, very clinical, right? For when I have these series of what I call Jewish genetics festivals, where I go to synagogues and talk about Jewish genetics and the 1 in 40. And I link a talk to getting people tested right then and there because it's a public health crisis in Ashkenazi Jews, 1 in
Yeah,
4.
it is. Yeah.
So it's different messages and different uh, opportunities to partner based upon the audience. So it's, as you were saying, know your audience, right? And be comfortable with who you are and who you're talking to, and speak like equals, right? Be informative and respectful.
Well, you know what? It's what your mother taught you when you were 2 years old. The golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. And if everybody in our ecosystem, our health ecosystem, woke up every morning and went to work and said, gosh, if this were my mom or my auntie or my dad or my daughter, how would I want to treat them? How would I want them to be treated? And we approached our work that way, we'd have a better health system. So I think we have to wrap up now. You guys have been so awesome. You're now my family and all my friends. I'm going to reach out to you and bring you on the show because we all have to do this work collaboratively. No one fights this fight alone. And so I'm so blessed to know you and be a part of this today. So Jody, are you wrapping us up?
I've got you. Thank you all so very much. What a wonderful group of panelists we have. And Ricky, you are a fantastic moderator. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story too with us and the information that you have. I am very happy to share that because this is such a high interest topic and it can be very helpful to have small group discussions to go a little bit further into your individual settings, we'll be hosting an upcoming Continuing the Dialogue session on this topic. So this is going to be a little bit more intimate discussion where we can explore how we can further increase accessibility and inclusivity in clinical trials. So what we're calling Continuing the Dialogue will be a 1-hour virtual session where attendees can ask questions and continue the discussion with one another and with experts in the field, including the speakers you heard from today. So we're excited to present the opportunity to you. It's only open to those who attended today's session. So it's limited to 50 participants. So stay tuned for an email with information on how to sign up. And you all who hung on to the very end have an advantage here. So you're going to be the first to know what's going on. Don't forget to complete the evaluation of the session within your Dialogue e-learning platform. So you'll see that in the Elevate platform, along with information on how to get your continuing education credits. So fill out the required information and to include the evaluation, and you will be all set. On behalf of everyone at the Prevent Cancer Foundation, thank you for joining us.